What is up, Siddharth Roy? Welcome to another episode of the Vinamr Kasana Show. We're back again. You were on episode 26, where we talked a bunch about the rise of ISIS in South Asia and India. Good to have you back. Obviously, you are an investigative journalist for The Diplomat. You specialize in conflict, security, and politics. And today we're going to talk about a bunch about the sort of pandemic of hatred that has spouted in India ever since COVID came around. Especially with the episode around the whole Tablighi Jamaat fiasco becoming one of the hotspots of the coronavirus in India. And you wrote an extensive article for The Diplomat on that. So let's get right into it. What is the a brief of your report?
So essentially what we saw is that when the news about the episode with the Tablighi Jamaat in Nizamuddin, Delhi, broke out, that a bunch of members of the Tablighi Jamaat were organizing a markaz, a gathering, and they defied. The initial story was they defied the lockdown and social distancing orders, and they also had foreign delegates inside that cramped little place, and then they got infected. Many of them carried the infection all around. What happened is, right on cue, the moment that news broke, Indian Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, etc., started overflowing with Islamophobic hashtags and content. We saw things like the virus being called Tablighi virus, Jamaati virus. Then people went on to say, there was this one guy who went on to tweet, and it got retweeted and liked several thousand times. This guy said that, there is a virus known as the coronavirus, but what's even worse is the Quran virus.
Right.
And not that Islamophobic hate is anything new in this country now anymore, but the episode with the Tablighi Jamaat, it just opened the floodgates. And we saw the transition of this. It didn't just stay on social media. Then you had some TV channels come up and news anchors shouting at the top of their voices, carrying the same kind of Islamophobic content. And they went on to say, you know what, this is a new kind of jihad. It's called Corona jihad. Like, the Muslims are going to get infected and come kill the Hindus. I mean, I don't even know what's the return on investment on that sort of a thing. Like, because the guy who gets infected in a Muslim is going to die probably much before infecting a Hindu. But then overall, what we saw is that after the Delhi riots, when you had another such surge, things had gone down a little bit. Of course, there was regular hate, but it was at regular levels. This happened, and there was again a big upsurge in this. And that's what my report is about. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting to see that most Indian newspapers, not all of them. I was going through some research, and I found that the Indian Express also reported on something where they said that a certain audio clip that came out of the Jamaat, where Maulana Saad, who's the leader of the Nizamuddin Jamaat, which is essentially the headquarters of the Tablighi Jamaat worldwide, he was telling his followers to essentially abandon social distancing and then let Corona happen. And it's somehow, something that's brought on about God, and that he was basically inciting a like a way to sort of not follow the government's orders, right? And there was a lot of controversy over that. Apparently, the Indian Express journalist who published that was subsequently summoned by the Delhi police, and the Delhi police said that it was wrong. What is your take on the whole situation?
So there was a voice clip which was even put out on YouTube. I myself heard it. The voice does sound like Maulana Saad saying it. Then, of course, they might go into saying that, though, it's not ours, it's fake or it's doctored, which even might be true. We don't really know. But the curious thing is that, I haven't come across a lot of reporting or in the public domain, or even the lawyer for the Tablighi Jamaat, who's also their spokesperson. He hasn't categorically denied, to the best of my knowledge, that Maulana Saad had said such a thing. And but of course, later on, we know that after all the fiasco happened, Maulana Saad did send out another message saying that please, let's all abide by the social distancing norms and the lockdown, and let's help the government clear the pandemic up and do whatever they need to do to keep things okay. Now, here's the point about this, that it's not just the Tablighi Jamaat which had given calls to not obey lockdown laws. There were some photos that I got on my WhatsApp as well, and not from propagandists, but from beat journalists who are not given to fake news mongering at all, which showed that certain mosques did say that the coronavirus isn't important enough for you to stay away from prayers. You should totally come for namaz. You should totally do your gatherings and so on and so forth. Now, here is where I want to take a little step away from the logic that's been followed by the Islamophobic people, is that it's not a Muslim issue. It's a religious issue. As we speak, there are Christian evangelists and right-wingers in America who are openly defying the lockdown. They're out in Michigan and where have you with arms.
I saw that. I saw that this morning. I saw a news clip.
And I just saw some a text sometime back tweeted by somebody which said that God did not want us to keep social distance. In India itself, we just when the Tablighi Jamaat episode happened, right after that there was a yatra in Solapur, where the police tried to go and tell them, guys, don't do this. This is not the right time to do a yatra. They pelted stones at the police. Then on Ram Navami, a similar incident happened in somewhere in Bengal. I forget the exact location of it, but there was a procession and a gathering on Ram Navami. And even before all of this, even before the coronavirus infection had taken on an epidemic/pandemic kind of a breadth in India, you had the Hindu Mahasabha organizing these Gaumutra parties on the street. They said that, dude, like, coronavirus is not going to affect us. It's all over the internet. You can see them, their card-carrying members, saying that this coronavirus is bullshit. It's not going to affect us. All you got to do is like continue with your lives as is going on. Not just that. Was it only religious people? No. You literally had the famous Neil deGrasse Tyson, the famous astrophysicist, in the very first podcast that he did about the coronavirus. He's actually laughing and joking about how it's possibly just another flu virus. I mean, do we really need to do this? Do we really need to do that? No, maybe not. And with him on that show is this epidemiologist who works for Columbia University or something. He's an epidemiologist, and even he's saying that, maybe social distance, but not really. Maybe I won't do interstate travel, but I won't cut down on, say, going to the shop or something. The fact is, we did not know how bad this virus is. It's just, I don't want to hold up a defense for the Tablighi Jamaat or the people who carried out the yatra in Solapur and so on and so forth. But the fact remains that people did not know. Humanity did not know that this virus is so dangerous. And mind you, even on the 13th, when this episode happened,
of April, right?
This very government's health ministry, the health ministry of India, gave out a press statement saying coronavirus is not a health emergency.
I would just say it's actually March. I just remembered it's March, right? Because
March. It's March. I'm sorry.
I remember that. I remember reading that in your own article as well, that they did say that before, that it's not an issue. I remember, in fact, I was in Mumbai at the time, and people were walking about freely, but there was this sense of a little bit of panic in some people, right? And then immediately you heard about the Janta curfew, and then this happened. And then suddenly people realized the breadth of the issue. And now, obviously, we're heading into almost 2
We
months of
also
lockdown.
had people writing columns about it. There was a ridiculous column in The Mint, written by a gent who's quite well known, Shandipan Deb. He wrote in
Yeah.
that article saying, "Oh, you know what? We Indians live in filth. This is not going to affect us. I mean, this is all just like mindless panic." I remember retweeting that tweet asking Mr. Deb to volunteer himself to get infected because he was so sure that nothing is going to happen. Why don't you do it for science? I said. Well, he
Yeah.
blocked me.
Yeah, it's really weird, right? This sort of the Indian faith in the unknown and in the future always working out for them in some miraculous way, which is such a big fabric of our culture, seems to have found its place again in this whole pandemic, where I still see, especially now, I am in Faridabad, right next to Delhi. I see that the lockdown has only begun to exist on paper, because from 7 to 7, I see almost the same amount of people on the streets, some with masks and some without, as I saw before the lockdown. And it's like people are at this point done with it, and they're like, I'm going to move on with my life irrespective of whatever happens. A lot of people are flocking to religion at this point. A lot of people are saying that it won't happen to me. This sort of like some sort of rationale to justify the disease not affecting them is happening all across India. And I think that's the same thread of religious belief and conviction that the Tablighi showed, that the Hindu Mahasabha showed, the one that you were talking about, where they had the procession around Ram Navami. Um, I don't know. Like, is there some kind of an ideological bent to all of this? Like what do you?
There is of course, there's ideology, but there's also reality. Uh, Point one is that this is the novel coronavirus, but we've had similar viri which come from the family called coronavirus, which have come earlier. SARS
Yeah,
was an example.
right.
MERS was an example, another example. And both these are closely related to the seasonal flu virus that we all get affected by. Now, the thing is that those viri did not have as devastating effects as the novel coronavirus, the COVID-19 one. So we didn't really know how it is going to happen, how it
Yeah,
is going to work out. Yeah, I mean, for that matter, if you look at the World Health Organization, even after the breakout in Wuhan, the World Health Organization initially said, oh, we don't see any reason to take containment measures. The World Health Organization itself has been saying that so it's a reality that we did not know this was going to be this bad.
yeah,
The second thing is this is not how society is built. We cannot live under a lockdown, uh, especially a country like India, where firstly social distancing is a joke in most parts. I mean, look at the damn population density in a Mumbai or a Calcutta or a
yeah,
Delhi, and what have you, you know.
yeah. Isn't it something like Dharavi has about 700,000 people living in less than a square mile?
Yeah. I've quoted that figure in my article as well. So the population density is massive. People cannot afford homes, where every person has a room to himself or herself, and that's the majority of this country. So
Yeah,
what are you going to do? There's a thatch. I mean, just any damn city in India that you live in, walk out. Go to any working class neighborhood, go to any slum, go to any even like low middle class neighborhood. People are living in, I mean, families of four and above are living in 1.5 rooms. What social distancing are we talking about here?
right.
There's a common tap outside where you have to fill water. You don't have running water in this country. I think Uttar Pradesh, for example, the most populous state in India, has like a terrible record in um, being able to supply this what you say drinking water through taps. What is the government doing? Like the chief minister of that state is a member of the Hindu Mahasabha. Uh, Instead of I don't know, maybe upping the infrastructure of health, getting the infrastructure of water, uh, affordable housing and all up, what are you doing? His guru, his own guru was somebody who violated the social distancing norm and carried out that idol worship service or function, which led to the other fiasco of the Wire doing a story about it and then trying to get the editor arrested and all of that. This is not a country where you can do it. Now let's circle back to the Islamophobic point which we started with. So here on the one hand, we see that people are violating lockdown. The lockdown itself is not well planned. There's more than ample evidence for that. And it's just impractical because of several reasons: poverty, overcrowding, unaffordable housing, so on and so forth. Now, in Submese, what you do is that instead of looking at this as a systemic problem, you identify that one group of Muslims and you open up the floodgates of Islamophobic content as if like it's only the Muslims or it's only the Tablighi Jamaat who violated lockdown. Yes, they did violate lockdown. Again, there are some nuances to go into because their markers had started before the lockdown happened.
Yeah, just one of the things, the listener's sake, what exactly is a markaz? A markaz is the way is like some kind of a region of a Tablighi mosque. Is that what it is, or is it a procession?
No, so the Tablighi, we need to look at a little bit about how the Tablighi Jamaat works. So the Tablighi Jamaat literally translates to a Jamaat, a collection of those who are Tablighs, like those who are
Society of Preachers. That's what I read.
Society of Preachers is the Wikipedia translation of it.
Yeah,
but it literally is like the learned, the educated, those who are trained in the ways of theology.
Right.
They are the Tabligh. So they are the ones who form the society. Now, how do they work? This group essentially is a group that spreads the word about what they think is the right way to practice Islam. The fundamental way to practice Islam, as was allegedly done at the time of Hazrat Paighambar himself. So what they do? Yeah, Prophet Muhammad. Yeah.
Did you use another name for him? I couldn't quite get that.
Paighambar. Paighambar means prophet.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. Okay.
So at the time of Prophet Muhammad, they claim that they know what was the way, what was the norm of living, what were the societal ethics to live by, how Islam was practiced at that time, and the Tablighi Jamaat wants Muslims to go back to that. Now, how do they achieve this? So this is essentially a group of preachers who go out and teach other Muslims. Now they have to undergo training for this. It's like a teacher's training camp. And that's what this program in Nizamuddin was about. Now, these kinds of congregations where they train the trainers, as the corporate term nowadays is, train the trainers, these sessions are held all throughout the year. And it's not only Nizamuddin, it's done in different places, but Nizamuddin is their birthplace, so it's like the most important location.
Yeah.
And preachers and those who are undergoing training to become preachers, they come there and they have to live in residence and get trained, and they come from all over the world and so on and so on. Now, what happened is the Markaz was already running, this specific edition of the Markaz was already running inside Nizamuddin when the lockdown was announced. Now, I'd like to remind you that the lockdown was a sudden announcement. So let's say I'm somebody who's inside the Markaz at that time. How am I going to get out and go home? I've not only come from different parts of the country, I've also come from some other country. I have delegates who have come from here, there, what have you. Flights shut, trains gone, buses taken off the roads, a virtual curfew has been announced with no prior planning, no prior warning. How am I supposed to get out of that place and go home? That's what happened to a lot of members of the Tablighi Jamaat. It's not that it's not that they planned to violate the lockdown by calling the Jamaat, which is what the narrative kind of became. That, oh, these guys, they just hate India and they hate Modi and they hate whatever, etc. And they're
Yeah.
jihadis. So they organize the markers. No, guys, no. The markers happens all the time. This is not how it works. So what we essentially see is that, that, I mean, this was unavoidable if things had gone on. You would have had, oh, by the way, a group of Hindu pilgrims were stuck somewhere in Uttarakhand. A bunch of people from Gujarat were also stuck in Uttarakhand. They were pilgrims who had gone there and lockdown announced कर दिया वो अटक गए वहां पे. Was there a hashtag which went Corona Dharma Yuddha?
Yeah. Yeah.
Was
Wasn't it like Amit Shah sent luxury vans / buses for a specific group of people who were stuck certain place because they were from Gujarat, right? They were
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, right? Like right now that I've been reporting, there are these clumps of clusters of migrant people who workers. A part of I mean, there's been great coverage in most of the channels about this, like most of the news organizations, which are not very pro-government or cheerleading the government. They've been reporting on the miseries that have befallen these migrant workers. They didn't come here thinking that they're going to get stuck in a lockdown. You and I did not think we were going to get stuck in a lockdown.
Yeah.
We're all stuck. So similarly, these people were stuck too. All that happened is a certain segment of Indian social media, a certain group of propagandists, they turned this entire narrative, they spun it into, oh my God, these horrible Muslims, and their jihad. They did it just to mess with this wonderful decision and much needed decision and so on and so forth. So that's the show of Islamophobia here.
Yeah. Aren't the Tabligis people who don't necessarily believe in waging holy warfare, because their whole idea is that you should only work on your own Islam first, perfect it, and then go about preaching to other Muslims to reform their Islam. Their intent is to never go beyond the Islamic community. Their whole idea is to preach and reform within the circles of Islam. Isn't that accurate?
That is the technical definition of their work.
Yeah.
And that is how they were formed. That is largely how they work. But I wouldn't go so far as to make that some sort of a standing understanding, because we do know that when you preach a certain kind of fundamentalist practice of religion, it does lend itself to other activities. We do, even though there is no record, and this needs to be really put on record, that there is no record that any member of the Tablighi Jamaat officially has ever asked anybody to wage jihad. There is no record of that. But does it mean that somebody from the ranks of the Tablighi Jamaat won't go join a jihadist organization or take up guns? No. But then that's true for all organizations. I mean, is it that the RSS will tell people, oh, you know what, go around kill Muslims? No, they've never done that.
Mm-hmm.
They've never done that on record. They never even said that, oh, we need ethnic cleansing or something of that sort. But does it mean that there aren't people, I mean, the people who've lynched Muslims or something, they have no link to the Parivar in any way? You create an ideological framework which might lend itself to other activities. What is essential here is that we need to understand that Tablighi Jamaat, whatever you said, is true. They are not trying to, at least their declared mission and vision statement does not say that we are trying to convert non-Muslims to Islam. No, that is not true. And they don't even talk about jihad. They have actually a very different understanding of jihad. For them, jihad is exactly this, that unke andar jo beh gaye, get them back. And all their official literature and statements also talks about this, that we are trying to tell people come to the path of God, find joy in the path of God instead of whatever else is not God's domain.
Yeah.
But, so you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as I was just reading through a couple of articles trying to get a sense of what the Jamaat is about, right? Because one thing that has happened in 2020 for certain after the coronavirus is that the Tablighi Jamaat, those two words have become a buzzword for, again, either blind hate mongering or blind defense. I don't think a lot of people have gone to the depths of this issue. Certainly, I had not. I'd only seen this floating around in the news and in articles, right? So it was very interesting to find that they are largely an apolitical organization, which allows them to penetrate into countries which essentially don't allow religious groups to be politically active, because they keep a very apolitical stance, have a loose sort of hierarchy, and it's interesting how they fund themselves in all their operations. Now, obviously, this is all sourced from crowdsourced websites and like other articles. Um, all of that, is that accurate? Do you think this is why they've been able to sustain for so long, and that this incident that happened is unnatural in the long history that they've had in other countries?
Yes and no again. See, as I was telling you just now, is that yes, technically they are of this nature, but the moment, I mean, I don't even know whether one can even, I don't even know. I actually know that you can't, it's just foolish to say that they are apolitical and religious. No group which is religious can be apolitical.
Right.
Essentially, because religion is political. Religion is statecraft. Religion does dictate how you must live your public life and personal life. It tells you how to dress. It tells you what to eat. It tells you who you can marry, who you can't, how many times can you do that, and what have you. How do you even do business? How do you transact? Should you do business at this time? Should you not? The question is Islam an exception to this? No. Hinduism dictates me not to eat some things and eat some things. They have certain days when to do this, when not to do that. Christians have always done that. So I mean, I will never say that a group, despite its claims, a religious group, despite its claims of being apolitical, can really be apolitical. The question here is, what is this? What is this country run by? It's neither run by the Sharia nor by some other religious text.
Yeah.
And code of conduct. This country is run by the Constitution of India. Does the Constitution of India forbid you from gathering with a certain religious belief? No, it does not. So, as long as they don't violate other criminal or sections of the criminal or penal code, they can very well gather. They can very well profess their religion. They can preach it. They can practice it, as long as they do not violate any other laws while doing it.
Yeah.
So this thing that even if, I want to step away from saying, oh, the Tablighi Jamaat isn't a harmful organization and that's why they shouldn't be targeted. No, that's not what I'm going to say. I'm going to say that they are as much a group, a power group, or a religious group, or a social group, cultural group, call it what you will. Have they violated any laws specifically? If yes, go charge them with it.
Yeah.
But what has happened is that we saw the Delhi police starting criminal proceedings against the Tablighi Jamaat, but we did not see that happen against the tourists from Gujarat. We did not see that happen against the Solapur Yatra people. We did not see that happen against the people who did the Ram Navami thing in West Bengal and what have you. That shows that the state itself is violating a basic tenet of the Indian Constitution, which forbids discrimination based on religion.
Yeah. Yeah, but weren't the Tablighis responsible for 30% of cases in India as of April 18, 2020? About 40.
That's what the data was set out by
the government, right?
The government. Now, even before, I choose not to comment on that. You know why? Because I don't know about the sanctity of the data that the
Right.
government is putting out. There is no third party audit of the data. Just yesterday, we saw that the number of deaths being reported in New Delhi and the number of burials and cremations happening according to the coronavirus protocol don't tally. The Delhi
Interesting.
government is reporting much fewer cases than the dead bodies, fewer deaths than the dead bodies, which are being buried or cremated using the coronavirus protocol. There's a massive gap in what is being told. For the longest time, the figures that were being put out in the early times, the figures that were being put out by international data aggregators, whether it's Johns Hopkins or it's World Meters and what have you, their figures were not matching the Indian government's figures. So this fact, this claim that the Tablighi Jamaat are responsible for 30% of the cases, I want to take a stand saying I don't know.
Yeah.
Show me the figures, make it auditable, give third party neutral bodies access to this, give access to your raw data to international experts, people who study epidemiology, people who do are data people and all, and then we can have a conversation. Having said that, let's say they were responsible for 30% of the cases. What would you do? Sure, go on, charge them with something.
Yeah.
But again and again, did you do the same with the people who attended the Kanika Kapoor bash? There was a BJP lawmaker at that party.
Yeah.
Is the parliament under, like, was everybody in the, every parliamentarian quarantined? This man who's a parliamentarian went for the party where there was a positive patient, and then he attended parliament. Did you quarantine all of them? Let's get that data out. How many people were, do we have this percentage kind of an analysis for how many people Kanika Kapoor infected, or how many people there have been others as well, right? Not just religious. There was a wedding thrown by some politician in Karnataka.
Yes, I remember that. I remember seeing that.
Yeah, then there was a BJP MP who did another such gathering somewhere, and so on and so forth. Like, how many people did they infect in the state? Do we know? We don't.
Yeah.
All of these measures of punitive action, of massive data analysis, and what have you, are directed at the Tablighi Jamaat essentially because they're Muslim. This is where the problem lies.
I see. Yeah. Fuck, man. I'm surprised by. I checked online. I checked to see if any other source would back those stats. I could find that instead of the central government, some websites used the health ministry. But mostly, if we can no longer trust the stats being put out by the governments we choose to elect, uh, how can we be informed about what's happening in our world, right? It's very alarming. I mean, consider you also have an extensive background in data journalism and coding, right? And I've taken one class in stats, quantitative stats, and what's your thing, like the thing where you basically do studies and then table out data, all of that stuff, right? And accuracy and peer reviewing, those things are basic. Those things are absolutely essential. Um, if we're not having that here, and a number like 30%, the level of dopamine, the level of fucking hits it just puts in your brain. It's like, oh yeah, Musalmanon ne 30% cases, and the same shit then gets peddled on WhatsApp, right? And then when you have no one to blame, you're like, ye tabligis ki wajah se hai. Do you want to take
See,
that call?
just as we are speaking, I'll hide the name. I
Yeah.
have a call coming in. You know who this is from? This is from a young construction worker, a 22-year-old
Yeah.
construction worker who's got stranded.
Mm.
He doesn't have the reason why we got in touch. I mean, I came across him during a recent reporting.
Yeah.
And when I met his group and several other groups like him, they were literally surviving on biscuits and water.
Sure.
Uh, why don't why isn't there any action against the contractor, the labor contractor who's left them to their fate? Point one. Point two, this particular young man, he's a 22-year-old guy. He lives in a one room kitchen with 11 other people. How about we take the labor welfare machinery to court for forcing people to stay under this kind of absolute violation of social distancing? This boy does not have an option to eat at this moment if he does not step out and do something. He has zero access to money because his labor contractor actually switched his phone off and ran away. He has no money, no food. It was a bunch of volunteers who actually got him food recently. All these claims about how the government is doing that, government is doing this. I don't see a lot of this getting translated to the ground. How about we take these people to court as well? How about you charge people responsible for the negligence of these people, of these workers and their misery to courts? There are labor laws which mandate that these people need to be taken care of. How many contractors have you seen in this country who've been charged for negligence? There are migrants dying on the street. There are workers, let's call them workers. Migrant is like this term which makes us think like they're like some extraneous thing. The fact is that if you look at the 2011 census, it has a separate section dedicated to the number of migrant workers in this country. It's the damn majority of this country, firstly. So let's just call them workers, not migrants.
Yeah.
There are laws in this country, labor laws, which mandate that these people should have access to basic healthcare, housing, and what have you, labor rights, essentially. When was the last time we saw a contractor getting charged for not taking these people, for not adhering to these? Are we willing to go after the big construction barons, the real estate barons, that you get your damn big high rises built on the backs of these people? Now there's a pandemic. You said bye bye. I don't know you.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about these?
Yeah. Didn't like the UP government recently passed a law where I was checking some Instagram stories and some creatives had shared. So I wasn't sure if it was absolutely accurate, but it said something along the lines of that the new laws are almost akin to slavery, where the owners or the employers of those laborers will no longer be held responsible, and there will not be safety checks, something along those lines.
Yeah. That's true. It's true. It's true. It's not just something that's been put out by creative people. It's actually true. So now that the lockdown is affecting the Indian economy, we need to obviously make amends, not by taxing the super rich of this country, because the chap or a couple of people in the IT department who made the mistake of saying that we need to impose an emergency tax on the super rich of this country, they've been suspended and something has happened. You can check it out. Huh? So how do we make up for the losses of the lockdown? Here are the poor people. The cannon fodder. Go do what you will with them. I mean, there's massive class discrimination even in our what do you call, like rescue, mitigation, etc., disaster relief efforts. This is a country that's sending aeroplanes across the world to get expats back in safely. But there's not a single bus or a train or anything. For the longest time, there was nothing for these migrants to go back to their houses, to their homes in the villages. And try and understand this. It's not that those villages where they hate
Siddharth, I think I lost you. Could you repeat what you just said? Yeah. I lost the audio for a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I was saying is that there's overt class discrimination even in our relief efforts. we are sending, this government is spending whatever lakhs and millions, I don't know what is the amount, to send aeroplanes to get expats back from other countries. Great, we totally need to do that. But then we could do nothing of that sort for uh, the internal displaced, the people who left their villages to come work, build fancy offices and houses for the rich people of this country. We couldn't do that, right? They had to just sit without food, without income, cramped up in little rooms and left to fend for themselves. Pata nahi kya hoga, bahut log hain. Cannon fodder.
Yeah. What's interesting is I was going through Twitter a couple of months ago, right? Sorry, a couple of weeks ago, and someone was saying it's amazing how the US, which valued human life so much, is letting its people die, and India, in which human life was not valued, is saving its people. On paper, at the start of the lockdown, that looked fancy. But as you describe the situation, because you're also reporting from Pune and actually helping these migrant workers, even though you will not admit that, I will do that for you, right? It's very interesting to see the number of videos circulating, the number of people you see outside on the streets. That reality is far from that. The international press has lauded our prime minister as being this amazing genius who has, uh, thrown out his chest and saved his people, right? And literally, I speak to friends in the US, that's what they think. But the reality is akin to what you and I have been seeing, more so you, right? Where the majority of these countries, in this country's people are absolutely suffering. And before this, at least they had the fucking the fucking living that they could make to survive and eat twice a day, thrice a day, and then live, and at least live alive. Right now, there's a stuck. I see so many videos of migrant workers on WhatsApp, literally crying and begging, saying that people have the luxury of having things ordered to their homes, or hum log yahan mar rahe hain, and he was just showing how his cycle tire was punctured. He had 3 kids on there, and it's just very weird to see that at the end of the day, I am, as an Indian living here, it just all comes down to a PR exercise for the prime minister. I mean, I've never been so vocal about it, but it just, with the last set of events that have happened, I'm just inclined to believe that.
That's actually okay. So two things here. Firstly, I don't agree that the US cares about, the US administration cares like is always caring about its people. That's not true. US
No,
has
that's
the
true.
world's largest. The US also already has the world's largest population of prison inmates.
Yeah.
Black people in that country are 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 literally, there are private prisons in which are full of black people. So I don't even buy that.
Yeah.
Having said that, so let's give people their due where it is concerned. Now, India is a massive country in terms of population and size.
Mm.
Implementing a lockdown wouldn't have been possible, like a watertight lockdown wouldn't have been possible for any prime minister, not just Modi.
That's true.
That wouldn't have been possible. I do not want to single him out as like, oh my God, this guy failed or something. No, I don't. I don't.
I'm not saying. I'm
And
not.
I don't
I'm
even.
just trying to correct. I'm not saying he's failing, but when I read reports, it's like he's being lauded as the savior, which in some parts is accurate, right? Because who the fuck would have the audacity to do a lockdown, right? But what I don't like is this. At the end, it all comes down to being a PR exercise when the reality is totally different. That's what I was saying.
I totally am with you on that. What I began saying is that, see, I refuse to take this in my line of work, and as a journalist, I've always refused to take a black and white approach to things.
Yeah.
I don't want to join either camp. One camp which goes, everything Modi does is like, yay, Modi did it. Like, here are my pom poms. I'm out to cheer. I am not going to do that. But at the same time, I'm also not going to simply go on ranting about, oh, Modi bad, Modi this, Modi that.
Yeah.
I think this discussion, I mean, this sort of a binary is just counterproductive, and and both extreme sides just feed into each other.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that. Having said that, yes, it is a massive PR exercise. It is very much a massive PR exercise. All the time that he's come, I think this was the third or fourth time that he came on TV at that infamous 8 p.m. Speech of his. This was the first time that I heard about something that he is going to do, that we are announcing a 20 lakh crore or whatever, X 100,000 crore, etc. package as relief. All the all the pressers, like it's not even a press conference. He doesn't do press conferences. All these announcements, 8 p.m. announcements of his, have been about what you need to do. Dear countrymen, this is what you need to do. आज तुमने जाके थाली ठोकना है, कल जाके दिया जलाना, light off करना है. I need the leader of this country, the one I voted to power, gave responsibility to run this country, to actually tell me what is it that you are doing, dude? Like, tell me what measures, concrete measures you took. Why did you set up the PM Cares Fund when you already have a Prime Minister's Disaster Relief Fund?
Yeah.
Why did you block audits or RTIs to the PM Cares Fund? Where exactly are you spending that money? How is it that I'm not seeing that money being used to airlift India's own internally displaced workers as opposed to getting expats out? I even saw, for that matter, that some hospitals in Mumbai, the government said the price of the testing, the COVID testing, is going to be pegged at a certain amount, 4,500 rupees or something. But then I saw bills which were more than that. I want to know exactly why that happened and what the Prime Minister of this country or the Chief Minister, what have you, what exactly did you do to ensure that testing was done at that rate? I want to know, for example, did you take what made you what made your health ministry say that coronavirus is not a health emergency? Did you take anybody to task for that? So no, I'm not willing to buy into, yes, it is massively a PR exercise. I mean, our Prime Minister Narendra Modi is great at PR. Like, he always manages to portray himself as a savior. Now, but that's also true for the other guys. Trump also likes to do the whole dance about, oh, I'm this Superman, whatever. The tragedy is that the virus isn't on social media. The virus doesn't listen to Man Ki Baat. It does not watch 8 p.m. news. It doesn't care about your status. It's going to go infect you no matter what.
Yeah.
And this is a game which is beyond the playbook of the strongman politician. We need to ask ourselves that question. Like, over the past decade, we've seen a rise of the strongman character across the world. Whether it's Modi in India, Erdogan in Turkey, Trump in the US, Boris Johnson in UK, Duterte in Philippines, and what have you. There's been a rise of the strongman, a macho guy who goes up there and literally makes references to his macho-ness. We had like whatever 56 inch ki chhati of Modi ji and what have you. What we see now really is that the macho man can beat up minorities and beyond that do nothing. They cannot affect any systemic changes which will actually change things for the better. They could not install a system of healthcare in any of these countries, including India, where we are prepared for such a pandemic. We don't have reserves to tide us over through an economic emergency like this. This is essentially a failure of that strongman brand of politics. And of course, why single Modi out? It's the same thing that's happening in so many places.
Yeah.
So many regional leaders are also showing that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This whole idea of the patriarchs of countries. This is the same sort of thing that I was discussing this with a professor of mine in the US, and I was like, there's a strand of Indians who need to mythologize their leaders in order for them to move forward with their lives. I was having a discussion with my dad, and he's like, people have to make some decisions on their own. ये नहीं कि हर चीज मोदी बताएगा कि अपनी धोनी कैसे है, अब सोना कैसे है. But people expect that, right? People are almost hoping, because I see even Modi's most staunch opponents will turn on the 8 p.m. news to watch what he's saying, because it does affect everyone. He does have that sort of strong appeal to influence and change, irrespective of whether you like him or not. There's that for sure.
The 8 p.m. thing follows. I mean, to your listeners and viewers, I totally recommend a book called The Shock Doctrine
The shock
by
doctrine.
The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein.
Yeah.
What happens is that, uh, from the demonetization time, and he comes on air and says, "Abhi, 4 ghante mein sab note band," and causes massive havoc. People literally die standing in queues of ATMs. The agrarian economy goes for a toss, and so on and so forth. See, this does an interesting psychological. This is a psychop, as they call in military analysis. This is a psychop on your own people. You keep them so flustered with these mega announcements, so scary announcements, that they get busy trying to just do the firefighting after that. मैंने बोल दिया demonetization. अब तुम मरो, तुम उसके पीछे करो. I will never open my mouth about that topic again. There is no going back to that. I announced Make in India in my first term. Then I never visited it again. I said I'll bring back black money. अभी बड़ा सा announcement. I'll bring back all the black money. हो गया. उसके बाद अभी you civilians, you voters, you fight among yourselves.
Yeah.
Modi supporters will say, very good. Modi is great. He's going to do that. Anti-Modi people will say, tum pagal ho. Kuch nahi kar raha hai. So basically, he's taken over the news cycle itself. The discourse has gone into a different domain, Nobody really goes back and says, sir, आज आपने आत्मनिर्भर भारत के बारे में बात किया. Isn't that the Hindi tarjuma of Make in India? 2014, whenever he came to power, he said Make in India. And abhi parso he said Atmanirbhar Bharat. What's the difference? What happened to the previous one, and why are you re-announcing that scheme? We don't have time to process or invest ourselves in asking the real questions or in any sort of follow-up. What happens is it gives us one shock after another, and we are like, oh my God, running helter-skelter. And just a quick little note about why I don't. I mean, if you read my writing, I don't really engage in the pro-Modi, anti-Modi debate too much. I don't. One of the things is that, it's just stupid that some journalists continue to. I'm not even talking to the ones who support everything Modi says. Unka to kaam hai, chalo wo karna. The other side needs to actually stick to the facts. Don't get caught up in, he'll tweet some random thing. I mean, Trump does it much better, to be honest. On a Friday evening, he comes and he puts some outrageous tweet on Twitter. Ho gaya. Now, Friday evening, the Friday evening it does so often. I mean, then you are a journalist who's working a beat or writing or whatever. Weekend tumhara barbad. Now you're gonna go on, chase the news cycle. So essentially, what he's done, what these strongman leaders do, is that they have taken control of discourse. The same thing is happening with the coronavirus episode. We literally got diverted from asking basic questions like, what is the testing rate in this country?
True.
How many ventilators do we have? How many critical care beds do we have in this country? Beyond the big city, like a handful, 2 or 3 hospitals in the big cities. Do we even have basic training for our health workers where they can do triaging, set aside the less infected, the more infected, standard handbook of epidemiology. We forgot to ask, are there enough gloves and PPEs, masks, etc.? We forgot to ask that, is there anything happening about prophylactic cure? What was achieved through the Islamophobia or anti-Islamophobia discourse, the Twitter, as I love, I have a horrible term for this. I call it the Pappu Peku Lungi dance. Because there's a
What is
bunch of
that?
so it's a lungi dance, like
Yeah.
what's a lungi dance? It's like this crazy dance where you forget everything else and you're just doing the thing, you're in the
Yeah.
moment. So now there is a bunch of people who tweet everything pro Modi and the other bunch goes a full anti Modi. But the discourse is lost in that. This thing about tweeting something like Corona Jihad or Quran virus. I think the first point of defense should be like, what? Mute those people, block those people, get them out of the discussion. Because we spent 2 weeks, close to 2 weeks, discussing whether it was right or wrong. Of course, it was wrong. We know that it was wrong. But
Yeah.
it's these very smart bunch of people who take control of the discourse. So, I mean, as things stand today, I don't really want to know whether it was the Tablighi Jamaat or the Solapur people or whatever who did it. I don't want to know the religion. I'm just not interested.
Yeah,
Give me
I'm
a valid
concerned for my
lockdown.
life at this point.
Exactly. I'm concerned about this guy who's just calling me up. I mean, I'm a reporter. I'm not a government official. I don't have the power to arrange something. You know what? He called me up the other. The first day he called me up, I helped him out in whatever little way I could.
Yeah.
And because I was the only person who he could pick up the phone and talk to, because he can't speak to an MLA, he can't speak to an MP, he can't speak to a
Right.
labor officer. The police में गया तो वो डंडा ही खाएगा. कोरोना के साथ साथ मार भी पड़ जाएगी. So because of that, what has happened is that guy actually called me up and said, "Sir, do you think something can be done about arranging the train for us to go back home?" It's fucking horrible. He thinks I can do that. And why? Simply because I was there on the phone. He needed somebody to tell. It's just ridiculous. I cannot help that man. I cannot organize a train for him. I cannot get him his job back. It just shows the desperation of these people over there that koi phone utha bhi raha hai unka. So what has happened is that, in all this nonsensical debate, this nonsensical provocation from one side and the other side reacting to the provocation, this Muslim nonsense and this, oh no, secular defense of it, we've actually lost track of the bigger questions.
Yeah. What do you think is a way for the masses to sort of get literate about media? Because that's one of the things that has, I guess, in the US become central to all their discourses, right? With so many independent factions existing with large enough voices to influence public opinion, it becomes paramount to make sure that the news that you're consuming is valid and tested. And for your article, you essentially interviewed a fact checker. Then you got someone from someone who was holed up in the mosque, right, in the Nizamuddin Mosque. And
No, he wasn't holed up in the mosque.
Yeah,
he is somebody who knew people who were holed up inside the mosque.
Right. So what's interesting about the way you report is because you report for an international publication, The Diplomat, right? You get a chance to be objective and you get a chance to summarize whatever has happened. But surprisingly, people are still consuming news on Republic TV, or for that matter, whatever the left side of that is. I have no idea, right? And it's weird with so much bias happening. I see a very CNN, MSNBC, Fox News type situation happening in India as well, where, I mean, I don't know. I was probably young enough to not make sense of this. Do you think this has always existed, and where do you see this heading? Like the sort of hard left and hard right bias in the news.
I mean, firstly, I don't know of a hard left bias in the news. I mean,
No,
I don't think there is a hard left bias in the news. I mean, hard left would be like, I don't know. I don't even know how it would exist because a corporate structure can't be hard left, essentially.
Yeah.
And whatever they may be liberal, there may be liberal voices. They are also run by corporations. I also work for a corporation. I have no option but to.
Yeah.
I don't think they can be hard left for that matter. But yes, coming to the central point of media discourse, it connects to what I was telling you that, this divide has been engineered, the divide and discourse has been engineered to benefit those in power. What we do is that we will take our positions depending on our political opinion, our political biases, whatever team we bat for.
Yeah.
Here is the thing, if I'm a hardcore Modi supporter, it doesn't matter what logic you get to me, I'm going to vote for it. If I'm someone who is completely anti-Modi, it doesn't matter what logic, what facts you show me where he's actually done well, I will just ignore it and continue with my thing. I don't really know how we are going to bridge this gap. I don't have a straight answer to this. Fact checking is something which is very necessary.
Yeah.
Journalists shouldn't go out with unverified news. And that is all that I can say. Like this guy who did the news report about trains starting from Bandra.
Yeah.
And it was based on an unverified news. He says that someone in the railways told him that. You actually faltered on a very basic tenet of journalism. Did he give it to you in writing? A decision as big as this, did he give it to you in writing that you are going to start a train? Did you get a copy of a letter? If not, you shouldn't have gone on air and said that. You caused a massive fiasco. Of course, then later on, some people came in and even turned that into a Muslim thing. I mean, it's vile.
Didn't you mention in your article that Rajat Sharma, who once used to be a great journalist, has now, obviously allied himself with a certain cause. He said that they were gathering because there was a mosque near the Bandra station. And I've probably been to the Bandra station a bunch of times. It was just
I've been to the Bandra station and had chai in front of that mosque since forever. Now the mosque happens to be there. The mosque had nothing to do with any calls. The Bandra station and the mosque are like next to each other. So वहाँ पे भीड़ जम गया. So वो mosque का responsibility. Now this is how devious the Islamophobic industry, propaganda industry is. They take a photo of whatever, the crowd beside the mosque. Oh, the mosque guys did it. Did you actually go and ask the people gathered there, oh, you're a Muslim? You're a Muslim? What was given? Did the Tablighi Jamaat give you a call to do I don't know, what is this? Railway jihad? Another term. Unreserved travel jihad. I mean, most poor people in this country anyways travel unreserved.
Yeah, I think these trolls should start working in the advertising industry. They'll make a bunch of really great.
This is the advertising industry. Political PR is professional advertising. I refuse to believe that hashtags trend on Twitter without the involvement of some major PR agency or the other. Modi ji has several PR agencies in his employ. All big politicians do. Modi is not an exception. This is advertisement. There are some people who actually specialize in political PR. There are groups which specialize in upholding dictators in different countries. This is very much professional PR. There is a lot of money riding on that.
I see. Yeah, and to sort of move things in a slightly different direction in the interest of time and otherwise, I have a couple of Muslim friends, and I'm sure you do as well, right? There is...
Yeah, it's like that. This sounds very dangerous territory. I'm racist, but I have black friends.
No. The reason I preface it like that, that's true. That's what most comedians say. I'm not racist, but there's a joke about being racist. The reason I say that is because when I talk to some of them, right, and I have this one friend, he has... I will not go into his personal faith and everything, but it's interesting that this is something in reference to what we discussed last time as well, about being pushed into a corner by the very forces that were supposed to protect you, right? You have been fucked so bad that you're either saying, fuck it, I'm just going to be an atheist, secular humanist, not even think about this, lest I will be prosecuted or looked at differently in India, right? Or I will become a student activist or something along those lines to make sure that the faith that I follow, the culture of my people, stays relevant and does not die under the hegemony of a certain kind of you know religion in India, right? That this sort of I, based on my limited opinion, I'm finding that more and more Muslims are forced to go to either side or abandon their religion completely, because the direction we're heading in, it just oddly seems to not be compatible with Islam. I mean, I don't know. What do you think about this?
So first things first is that uh, Hindutva is also not compatible with Hinduism for most
Absolutely.
people around India. And to the extent, I mean, this time around, the Islamophobic hate mongering got so ridiculous that none other than the RSS distanced itself from the Tablighi Jamaat uh, hashtags that trended after.
Yeah.
The additional joint secretary of the RSS is on record saying the Tablighi Jamaat did something that's wrong, but do not use it to tar the entire Muslim community. So it's not even like, secular humanists, atheists, or Muslims who are saying that. It was literally the biggest group, the ideological head of the Hindutva movement in this country, which had to distance itself from the just absolutely ridiculous kind of anti-Muslim propaganda. The second part is that I have to, there is no way but to agree with what you're saying, that we are polarizing the discussion so much that if I was a young Muslim man in this country, I would, even if I had pro-constitutional views, the daily attacks on them, the daily denial of natural justice, the gearing up of the state machinery to persecute the Muslims is, of course, pushing them into extreme camps. I mentioned this in your previous, in our previous interview together. That sorry, I need to mention the Tablighi Jamaat again. So when the Tablighi Jamaat fiasco happened, several Muslim voices, prominent Muslim voices in this country, clearly said that what the Tablighi Jamaat has done is wrong. Ye
Yes.
jahalat hai. How did you? What does the Islamophobic PR machinery do? It ignores these Muslims and goes on to saying, "Oh, sab Musalman aise hai." So it's a very conscious decision on the part of the Islamophobic machinery. We don't care what is the reality. We are going to go on ranting about other Muslims are bad Muslims
Right.
or whatever. Having said that, coming back to your point, yes, I do think this is a serious problem. As someone who reports in, or whose core beat is security, a lot of it is Islamist terrorism in South Asia. It's absolutely true. I mean, as I mentioned last time, that the ISIS, it had no base in this subcontinent, especially not in India, until very recently. And there was a lot of difference of political thought and ideological thought on how to get the Muslim voice heard among the various Muslims communities divided across different parts of South Asia. But now that's going away because there is a government or a political party in power which refuses to differentiate between the various Muslims that exist. It even refuses to differentiate between the various Hindus that exist. Yeah, like I was born to Bengali Hindu parents. Their Hinduism is really very different from the Hinduism of many other places. Eating fish or meat is not banned in our Hinduism. Then where did this idea come about? This uniformity? Oh, Hindu dharma matlab tumne mass nahi khana hai. Ye kahan se hai? There are Hindus in the south of India, Kerala, who eat beef.
Yeah.
Not Hindus, according to you, according to this one definition. So this, I mean, you know what it essentially is, that India is an agreement between various different people. You know, we are taught in school we are a diverse people. We are not diverse. We are different.
Yeah.
We are nations which have come together through like something like a treaty. The treaty is called the Constitution of India. Okay, हम सब अलग-अलग लोग हैं, but we'll agree to come together and work under a certain framework, provided you follow the common minimum program, which is known as the Constitution of India.
Right.
With this approach, which has been taken by this government and the party in power, that we are going to go on demolishing every aspect of this common minimum program called the Constitution. The judiciary is under a cloud of bias. The election machinery is under a massive cloud of doubt. For the first time, we see the armed forces, people in the armed forces coming out and giving press conferences. I mean, this has never happened in Indian history before.
Yeah, didn't General
We
Bipin
see,
Rawat say that he said he told people to go and make in India 4 days before the actual announcement by Modi.
I don't know about that specific date, but yes, it worries me that the Indian army is being pulled into political discourse with each passing day. This worries me at various different levels. One is literally the professional capacity of a group to protect India. The army has been a secular place in terms of like there are Muslims and Christians and what have you. Everybody's been there. I mean, one of our greatest military leaders of this country was Sam Manekshaw. He was a Parsi. So it's not that the army has never been a Hindu army.
Yeah. We
The
wouldn't
Air
want
Force
that.
is not like, yeah, we never had that. But so I'm a little worried about the repeated occurrences of how military leaders in this country are coming out and giving press conferences which seem very aligned with the government's political line. So what I want to come back to is that the basic tenets of what has kept these diverse nations together to form the Union of India. And the Constitution, in fact, defines India as a union on the lines of the European Union or the Soviet Union, what have you. We are violating that basic agreement. Look at what happened right after that Bandra Mosque fiasco.
What was the Bandra Mosque fiasco? The train station?
That one about the train one, yeah. Immediately after that, we started seeing hashtags come in. Uddhav resign, Uddhav Thackeray resign. Now, what did you just do over there? Uddhav Thackeray's government is a democratically elected government that won a confidence motion, went through all the constitutional checks and balances, and is in power in Maharashtra. There are some people, we don't know who, fake handles. We allegedly don't know who. You are using this one fake episode and the corona fiasco and the corona pandemic to actually wiggle your way to toppling this government. You're violating a basic tenet of federalism in this country. This all worries me very deeply. That we are violating everything that holds us together, not just religious equality, not just defenses against discrimination by caste, not just the rights of workers to earn and live a dignified life. You're violating every aspect, step by step by step. If we hold nothing sacrosanct, if everything can be bought and sold, every democratic tenet, every constitutional practice, if might is right, then why even have this country together?
Yeah. Yeah, those were some very powerful points about where we can head in the future. It's also interesting to see that increasingly, not to paint a pessimistic picture, that this whole idea of being the world's largest democracy is slightly eroding in front of our eyes as something that only looks fancy on paper. There are some very important tenets of that are still existent. But things like what you mentioned and what we discussed on the podcast are a clear testament to what is happening. And I hope that we can all fight this lockdown and then come out strong, and then see who we are as a nation. I don't know, like there's this always news anchors always have a tendency to just conclude with and then a general statement about human nature and then just end saying this or that. But I generally believe that despite all of these things, I think we can still attach some sort of modicum of hope, as you do, even after seeing all the atrocities and all the problems that you see in society in the Constitution. And we can attach that hope in the Constitution and hope something like that happens. Thank you so much for being on this podcast, Mr. Roy.
Thank you. Always a joy, Vinamra.
Yeah, it's this was our second podcast together. You were officially my first returning guest, and people can follow you on Twitter, where you will not follow anyone back, but will tweet.
I'm actually almost not tweeting anything anymore. If you want to follow me, really, don't you have better things to do in life? But in case you don't have better things to do in life than follow boring midlife crisis-stricken guy, you can just simply Google my name and you will see what I write.
Yeah.
But can I use your platform to just send a message out?
Please.
I really want people to do this. I would like them to do that. Is don't look at the government to help the people around you. Every city that you live in, there are migrant workers around you. खिचड़ी बनाओ घर में, उनको दो. जो राशन खरीदते हो उसका एक पार्ट दे दो. It's more than enough. Yes, always ask questions of your government. I'm not, when I put forth my negative views, I have every duty to do that in a democratic society. I'm going to question the people in power. I'm going to hold them responsible, accountable. Do that. But at this time, also go out and just help people who are just around you. If you had a maid servant or a manservant working in your house, make sure you're giving them their salary, even if they aren't working. Buy a few extra the strips of medicine, whatever prophylactic medicine you're taking, vitamins or whatever you're taking, buy a few extra. Give it to them. Just step outside your house. Ask people, are you doing well? If they don't have a mask, buy one, give it to them. Buy a bottle of hand sanitizer, give it to them. We have been abandoned by the state and by this grand structure we call capitalism. I mean, it's just visible all around us. The only thing that we can do in this time, other than hold powerful people accountable, is to just go out and help around in your community. You don't need to send money to some big central fund, some big fund there, some this year. You don't need to do. 500 रुपए खर्चा कर दो. एक मैं सिगरेट पीता हूँ, मेरे सिगरेट का पैसा कट करके दे दो वैसे. If you like your drink, cut down on a couple of drinks, share it around. That is going to have the biggest impact around us.
Right, especially now when expenses are being cut down to almost 1/3 of what they used to be. I'm living in my family home now, and we used to spend, there was like a significant family expense, 5 people living under one house, one roof. Now that's like what? We're spending about somewhere between 15 to 20,000 on food and everything else. And that's so low when you compare that. It's like 5 people and all of that. And there's easily so much money left that even people who are middle class can help. People who are lower middle class can also help. Because the people out on the streets are daily wage workers. They don't have a fixed salary, most of them, and if they do, they rely on their paymasters. So thank you for sharing that. Absolutely.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.